Hey everyone, it's Justice, and today's video I'm going to be talking about how I researched, joined, and ultimately left the Mormon Church all within a year. So, here we go. So, I'm trying to think when exactly this was. I want to say maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Anyways, I was on my way home from work one night and I was trying to get a hold of my sister who was at home and she wasn't responding, so I was like, that's weird. Anyways, I get home and she tells me, oh, I'm so sorry that I didn't respond to your text because these two Mormon boys came to our door and I felt too bad to slam the door in their face, so I was listening to what they had to say. And I was like, huh? Because before this moment, I heard of the Mormon Church before, but I didn't think it was a real church because the only thing that had to do with Mormonism that I was exposed to was the Book of Mormon musical. So in my head, I'm thinking it's just a fictional made-up church for the purpose of the musical. I had no idea that this was a real thing. So I was like, no way, no, you're lying to me. And she was like, no, for real, they gave me a Book of Mormon. I said, what? Let me see that. And so she handed me the Book of Mormon and I was starting to flip through the pages. I was like, oh my gosh, this thing is full. It's real. And I was just in shock because at that point in my life, like I said, I just didn't think it was a real religion. And no offense to Mormonism, it's a beautiful religion on its own. But anyways, so after that, I didn't give too much thought about it for the rest of that week until the following week when me and my sister were both home and there was a knock at the door and the missionaries were back to talk to my sister. And so as they were talking to her, I was in the kitchen drinking some coffee and kind of listening in on what they were saying and kind of curious because some of the stuff they were saying, I felt like I resonated with, and so at that moment, they didn't know that she even had a sister. They only knew about my sister, so I walked up to the door and they were like, oh, hello, who are you? So, I introduced myself and blah, blah, blah. I'm her sister and everything, and, so then they started talking to me too. Well, as they were talking to me, they introduced their names. There was a tall one and a short one. The tall one was Elder Stringham, I believe, and then the shorter one was Elder Epstein or Epstein. I'm not sure how to say his name, but anyways, they were really sweet, really nice, kind young dudes, and and so I just started talking to them, and then eventually my sister kind of just walked off. She said she made an excuse or something, and then she just left me at the door with them. So then we were talking, and then they invited me to church, and I was like, you know what? Sure, why not? Because at this point in my life, I was kind of not really necessarily depressed, but more kind of lost on what I was doing with my life and things like that. So they kind of came into my life at a vulnerable point in my mental health. So maybe that's why I was so drawn to them and drawn to the whole Mormon religion, because my mind was kind of weak. And this is just my personal opinion. I'm not saying that, the Mormon church preys on people who have weak minds. This is just my personal story, so sorry if I offend anybody. But anyways, so then I went to church with them and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was so fun, and it made me feel a sense like I had a sense of belonging at that church. And so then I started going to church every week. And then they introduced me to the sister missionaries, who I became close friends with at that time. And and so then I would attend church every week, and slowly, surely, leaning more and more and more towards this religion. I would go home from work and I would go on YouTube and look up videos on the Mormon religion, Mormon history. I would obviously read in my Book of Mormon that I had. And so eventually they started asking me if I wanted to become a member officially and get baptized. And I felt overwhelmed with emotion about it. Like, I wanted it so bad, but I felt so guilty for like all my sins that I've done in my life, and I didn't feel deserving of it, but they made me feel like everything was gonna be okay. So I said yes, and we scheduled my baptism, and the only person that I kind of invited to that was my best friend, who is still my best friend now, because I didn't really feel comfortable bringing my family to that. So, because my mom, she's Pentecostal Christian, and she kind of, didn't want me to get too much into Mormonism. But anyways, so I got baptized, and at my baptism, after, getting baptized and going back into the bathroom, I like broke down crying. And I don't know why. Like, I was just so overwhelmed with emotion, so overwhelmed with the like support and love that I felt at the church and from the members. And I was just, in my head, I'm thinking, yes, this is it. This is my religion. And mind you, at this point, I think when I got baptized, it was like about halfway through the year, that year. So like I was investigating, and then I got baptized at the church. Anyways, so once I became a member, I still would go to church and, attend all the events and things like that. But there's a part that I forgot to mention, but before I got baptized, I got invited to go to the church one day to watch, I forgot what it was, like, the head of the church was speaking at a conference or something, and so I got invited to go to the church, and this girl from the church picked me up and drove me there. But then after we were done there, she was driving me home, and we got into a car accident. And at that point, I hadn't been baptized in the church, but that car accident was so scary. And in that moment after the accident, seeing that I was still okay, seeing that I was still alive, I was like, oh my God, this is like a sign from God. Like, I was in fact very delulu at that point. That He is protecting me. And then when I went to the hospital, the elders came to the hospital and prayed over me. And I was
girl,
like, oh
I was so delulu with those elders.
I'm gonna get baptized. Like, but anyways, yeah. So after being a member for about like a month or two, I started to have a lot of doubts. I started looking up contradictions within the church, and some of the things that they were teaching me was starting to become questionable.
Oof.
Like, for example, the biggest thing was them telling me that coffee's a sin.
That's me in the corner.
I have my coffee right here.
Losing my religion.
Yeah, they told me, like, I cannot be drinking coffee, cannot be indulging in caffeine. And that just, like, really shocked me, because what? Why would God care about coffee? I was confused, but you know what? I did refrain from drinking coffee for the majority of the time that I was in the church. As bad as I as much as I hated that, I did refrain drinking from coffee because they convinced me that it was a bad thing to indulge in. Anyways, so that was like the first seed of doubt that I had in my head, and followed by their rough history of the church, the contradictions, the way the church was even formed. You know, Joseph Smith's story started making me feel like I had a lot of doubts, and I started questioning on why did I even start believing this stuff in the first place.
Because you were hypnotized by the elders' cuteness.
So then I slowly started distancing myself from the church, and I remember vividly one of the last times that I went to the church. It was a YSA ward that I would go to, by the way, but one of the last times that I went, after the YSA meeting, I was about to leave, and one of the church elders or whoever stopped me, and then he asked me, I forgot what he asked me, but basically he was giving me an assignment, like a calling for me to do within the church, so that way I would have more responsibilities in the church, and I would have to like go to the church more. And he said like it was like a divine calling from God that he gave me that, or something like that. I don't exactly remember his words, but basically that's what he was like implying. And I was like, yeah, sure. And then after that, I went home and I was like, I am not going back to that church. And I feel so bad because I kind of just left them hanging. And I remember after not going to church for a couple weeks, you know, I got back into drinking coffee, and they would try calling me. The sister missionaries would message me on Facebook. People from the YSA ward would try getting a hold of me, and I just was like not having it. I was like, nope, I do not believe this stuff anymore. And like I said, no offense to anybody who is a Mormon, like that, if that is your truth, that is your truth, and I respect you for your religion. I do, but it just was not for me. It just was not for me, and there were so many more stories, so many more mini stories I could tell you that have happened while I was at the church, but I just couldn't do it anymore. So yeah, I just stopped going, and I haven't gone since then. You know, technically I never withdrew from the church, so technically speaking, I am still a Mormon. I'm like a Jack Mormon. That's what you would call me. So yeah, that's about it. That's my story. And thank you so much for listening to my random story about the Mormon Church. And if you have any questions, or if you want to know more about, in detail about my church experiences, you know, the trips that I went on with the YSA ward, and some stories that I have, let me know, and I can make additional videos about this subject, because all these events occurred within 1 year, like from January through the whole year, and by December I was not interested in the church anymore. So it was a pretty packed year of Mormonism for me. But anyways, yeah, thank you so much for watching, and bye bye.